The Visiting Artist Program, funded by PAFA's graduate program, brings an outstanding roster of local, national, and international artists to PAFA each semester for lectures, critiques, and workshops. The program exposes students and the public to a range of artistic approaches and fosters discussion about contemporary art and ideas. This evening, we are pleased to have Paul D'Agostino joining us. Paul D'Agostino is an artist, writer, curator, and translator. He has had solo exhibitions at Silas von Maurice Gallery, Life on Mars, Weathervane, Pocket Utopia, and Nortemar, and two-person shows at Lodge Gallery and Slag. His artwork and curatorial activities have been written about in the New York Times, Art News, Art Review, the Huffington Post, the New Criterion, Two Coats of Paint, Hyperallergic, Art F City, Artfully Learning, Paper Magazine, and the Brooklyn Rail, among others. He holds a PhD in Italian literature and has taught art, language, literature, cinema, culture, and interdisciplinary courses at a number of institutions, including Parsons The New School, Brooklyn College, Fordham University, and Rutgers, and he is currently the MFA Writing Advisor at the New York Studio School of Drawing, Painting, and Sculpture. D'Agostino writes in and translates among a number of languages, and he is a former art editor at Brooklyn Magazine and the Elle Magazine, and has been the assistant editor of the Journal of Italian Translation for many years. He now contributes to occasional pieces to Hyperallergic and other publications. D'Agostino founded Centauro Gallery in his Brooklyn loft in 2008 and ran his programming in the physical space for about 12 years. He now operates it at large. D'Agostino has been a visiting curator, critic, and artist at venues including the Jewish Museum, Queens College, Parsons, Residency Unlimited, NARS Foundation, M. David Residency, and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. Let's all please give a warm welcome to Paul. And Paul, you can go ahead and share your screen with us at this time.
Okay.
And I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself and hand this over to you.
Hold on, not yet. I'm almost there. Okay.
No worries.
Is it working? No, yes. Okay.
Yep. You can see it now, and I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Okay, so it's all me now?
Yep, it's your presentation.
Okay.
Looks great.
All right, well, thanks everybody. Thanks for the invite to talk at PAFA today. Thanks to all the organizers who've been working so hard to get all these going, and definitely thanks to all the artists for the studio business I've been doing with some of them, and I'm looking forward to more. They've been really, really good conversations so far. The nature of my talk will be about my work and about one's practice as an artist, maybe in a general sense. And so I'm calling the presentation Expansions and Translations and Such Like. And I think that anybody familiar with my work probably has heard me talk about translation a lot, if they've heard me talk about it. And expansion is just another way to address that in some way, but that will become a little bit more relevant toward the end. And then the Such Like is because other stuff comes up, right? Anyway, so let's move on. This first image is from my chromatic alphabet work. And so I will probably talk about that work principally once I get to it. But I wanna walk through some other bodies of work that are um, current or recurrent. Um, Sometimes it's recurrent. It's current and recurrent at the same time because I can only work on certain things in certain studio settings. And other things that were maybe not necessarily abandoned, but like installation kind of things that never quite happened. But I want to walk through ideas of translation and um, storytelling and narrative. If people ask me, what do you do? What kind of work do you make? I always talk about, well, there's always a language element in my work, or there's always text in some way. And so the assumption is, oh, well, you just have words on everything. And I say, no, it's not like that. But that's also a lie, because sometimes it is. Oh, you tell stories. So it's book format. And, well, sometimes. So I don't know. Maybe it's a mess. Maybe there should be more focus according to some condition of art stuff, but I don't think so. And anyway, I kind of don't care. That's a different concern, and it's not the one that I have. I'd rather make stuff. So there's all kinds of ways and reasons to make stuff. I have a body of work that I really love working on, and it's called Floor Translations, and it's a body of work where I can put a lot of my interest in storytelling and indirect representation and interpreting and the importance of names and the weirdness of words. I can put all kinds of stuff into these floor translations, and I found them on accident. On the left, I guess it's your left, right? It's my left, it's your left. It's the left. It's the left-hand side of the screen. Anyway, that is just a paint stain that was on the floor of a room, and I kind of wanted to memorialize it in some way because I had lived with it for years, and then I was not going to have it anymore because I was not going to be in that room anymore. And so I thought, well, I'll make a drawing of it. Yeah, a lot of fun, right? So I did an observational drawing, not a tracing, because I tried and it wouldn't work. But I did an observational drawing of it, kind of hovering over it and doing a little sketch. And I kind of really liked it. But the reason I liked it so much, and I had lived with that stain, and I had given it an identity in my head. Every time I saw it, it was large enough that it was quite apparent in the room. And every time I saw it, I thought, that's the man with crappy arms and legs, because it's hard to see, but his legs go, whatever. The white of it went down further as legs, but it got rubbed off from my feet walking on him. So he had a name, and then I did this drawing, and then in my studio, I did the drawing on the right. And I hadn't done that drawing with an intention of it turning into anything at all. I just wanted to memorialize him, and I liked the idea of there being a memorialization of something so trivial and, that like really didn't matter. So I turned it into what I like to call a negative space drawing, which makes and it doesn't make any sense. But anyway, that's how I refer to them. And then I put this little inscription: man with crappy arms and legs wonders, what have I done? And, fault of my own, I had to turn that into a story. So he turned into a next page, and the next page sort of changed him a little bit. And I'll show you a bunch more of the translations, but so you get an idea. You have that paint stain on the left, and then there are other paint stains on the right that were from a studio I was working in at the time. And I guess if you take a couple seconds to look at those paint stains, you'll recognize them in the drawings that come later. I really liked that process of doing the observational drawing of a paint stain. So I kept repeating the process of observational drawing of paint stains, came up with a bunch of stuff. So this is also a book, but these are 5 stories, the first 5 floor translations that I did. So the characters that you see here and over here are all here. So there's the man with the crappy arms and legs up at the top left, and his story gets told all the way to the right. So the first drawing is faithful. The other drawings, I zoom in, and I flip them around, and I go to details and stuff like that. And they all have names, and the names are really important because that helps me tell their story. Like the kind of monster-looking guy in the middle, his name is Herr Dr. Zweizähne, because the stain seemed to have a couple teeth. So he's Herr Doctor, right? He's Mr. Doctor, 2 teeth. And so he dies and gets buried in his profession. Sound familiar? So those are 4 translations. Here's a little bit of a closer look. Yeah, so you can see the negative space drawing, and then the negative spaces also gets filled in by a narrative. So the negative space becomes the character, and the narrative fills the negative space. So that's kind of the conceit going on in these works. I like to talk about them a lot, but you know what? Let's kind of move on to the sculptures. I thought it would also be interesting for them to have a 3rd dimension. So this is a studio shot from when I first finished the first 5 sculptures for the first set of floor translations. Yeah, I just kind of like that image. It's maybe better than a lot of images of them all finished, but they look like a cast of characters. Well, they are. Anyway, moving on. So here's what an install shot looks like from the first time they were exhibited at Pocket Utopia. So you can see the sculpture kind of intervenes in the middle of his story, and there's that wooden block that implies the floor, that, you know, the translation comes out of the floor and becomes this 3rd dimension of the 2 dimensions from the paint splatter. There's all kinds of stuff that I think is interesting. But, you know, I never would have made this work if it weren't, I certainly wasn't working on things like this at the time. So it was, you know, I could expand on what I'm doing now if I pursue this very weird idea, because I have no idea where it's going. And it turned into a really productive body of work. So, you know, helpful. This is from the 2nd body of floor translations. There are 10 stories overall in the 2 books of floor translations, and there are a lot more characters because some of the stories have multiple characters. And there are 5 sculptures in the first series and 10 sculptures in the second. The sculptures in the second series are very, they're of a very different sort, and they're the metal sculptures that you see hanging out of the wall. I wanted to make the sculptures different for the second set of characters, and there are 2 sculptures for each set of drawings. So off to the left, you see a figure named Lady Sky Charmer, off to the right, you see the story of the Brobdingnagian Pentapede, and then in the back, there's the story of the Attenuating Snowman. So sometimes even the size of the works relates a little bit to the name, actually. In a sense, the story, but the name is a very important thing to kind of becoming a name or embodying or living up to or into a name, because it's just a sound, right? And these names have meaning, but also it's just a sound. And sometimes it's a word, but it's still a sound. And so those two sculptures above the attenuating snowman are the, one is a sort of portrait of the attenuating snowman, and the other is the sun that melts him into forgotten territory. So that's those. I also made, I've never shown this because it's disgusting. I call this a Paul translation. And I had an idea during a heat wave one summer to shave my head, like all off, or not my head, but my hair on my head, and let it fall onto wet gesso and see what happened. And it turned into this terrifying bird that I probably look like. It kind of turned into one of the Floor translation characters, the shrieking chicken from the farmstead. But it, I have a pretty avian skull from the side, and it's right there. So it worked, but it's disgusting. And I think I still have it in a box somewhere in a hot room, which is gross. So I also do a lot of drawings of animals. I had planned to do a show after the first show of Floor translations. I had created a tangential story to Herr Doktor, where there's a grad student assistant who is part of the Herr Doktor's dig, archaeological dig that he dies in. And the grad student escapes or whatever, makes it away from the research project, and then is working in some shack, right? This was going to be in the story. And it was going to be called The False Taxonomist. So there were going to be all these drawings of animals and plants and things like that, and weird bones and all of the monotremes, which aren't many, but there's the long-nosed or long-beaked echidna and the short-beaked echidna, and the most famous monotreme, the duck-billed platypus. Monotremes are very interesting. But anyway, so there are all these weird drawings, and they were going to be an installation of just a room full of charcoal drawings and this weird story that I thought, well, maybe it could be a voiceover, or maybe it's a voiceover in a book, or I don't know, but I was planning it, and then it never happened. So I have hundreds of weird drawings like this that make no sense with relation to the rest of my work. I mean, you saw what I opened with, right? But the story was important to me, and I was going to have so much fun writing it. And look, what the hell are these? These are very strange, right? But, I really enjoy doing them. And sometimes you just do drawings because they're fun to do. These are these like gesso drawings that I like to do, where I put down gesso first and rub charcoal into and around to, kind of get at an image, but it's a really good effect for bone. So these look just like bone. I'm telling you that. That's not fair of me. But in a sense, the gesso comes through, and how the charcoal interacts with it, it has a nice effect. Anyway, so those are weird, and like all covers of Danzig albums, probably. But it's all made up. Jellyfish. Sometimes you draw a jellyfish. This taxonomist was going to be very strange, and I don't know why. A kiwi, because why not? Penguins. Her name is Gloria, off to the right, and that's Bernardo, and he gives her grief, and she skates away. An elephant foot. There were very weird things going on. An ostrich and a spider. This is a 17-page story that tells the story of the ostrich and the spider. And the spider ultimately overcomes the physical prowess of two ostriches, and it's funny. These have nothing to do with what I was just showing you, right? But these are related to language in a very different way, at least for me. Visually, they get at an idea of a refrain or a repetition or maybe a rhyme. And so I was thinking of the how couplets work, and in Italian they're called distici, and I like that. I like the the idea of couplets and how can couplets be represented in images. And so I had this process that I was exploring for a while, sometimes successful, sometimes not. These are mostly done. Off to the right, they're all in their finished stages. But anyway, obviously it's a studio shot. And the larger ones are a little bit different. But anyway, it's a process that I call parallel painting, and I liked calling it that. And it involves, applying a certain amount of color from a palette twice at the same time. So off to the left and off to the right, and then off to the left and off to the right, and then, changing colors and changing marks, but trying to stay similar without being the same to see what would happen. And then sort of waiting until something started to resolve. And then kind of calling the process done. And therefore, the pieces need one another. One needs the other to be itself, because it couldn't have existed without it. That's the idea. There's a similar idea here. I call these polytype monoprints. And I started making these because I really like the expression, polytype monoprint. That doesn't really seem to make sense. And in fact, it's a word that I like how it almost makes sense. But they're, in a sense, all the same piece. And I like to think of these as a sentence. The first one, well, off to the upper left, let's say, and if you read them 1, 2, 3, 4, those 4 on the left side, they all need one another because it was a monotype process that I made with using a plate and preparing the plate and printing once 4 times until the paint ran out, and then preparing the plate again and printing backwards. So kind of crossing back and forth over each one in reverse, like this way, and then backwards, until something seemed to resolve in the middle. So like for this set here, do you see my arrow? You do, right? So for this set here, that one felt resolved to me. So therefore the rest were done too. And I didn't care, so I couldn't touch them again. Over here, this was a set that I really liked, and I kind of felt like they all resolved, but that's my opinion. Anyway, they were a little bit sketches at the time, but I kind of came to like them a lot, and I definitely like the process. Here's another set. You can see a little bit how it starts and then disappears and then comes back. Another set. This was another printmaking process that turned into a story of the red carnation reading enough philosophy to will herself into becoming a golden sunflower. But these are all the same, like, drawing, print from the same prepared surface of a bunch of chalk pastels. So I kept preparing the surface and doing another drawing on top. So they all come from the same source, drawn over and over again. So in a procedural way, that red carnation at the beginning really does turn into that golden sunflower at the end. So this is an example of, using the process in a way that would make literal something in the story. This is, how does language factor in here? Well, these are just a bunch of collages. Each one is the size of a New York Times unfolded. And they're collages I made by tearing the negative space, the so-called negative space of the colors in the newspaper each day, or a lack of colors or whatever, but any non-text space in the newspaper each day. So that's 1 day's worth of how much non-text space I could tear out of a newspaper. And all of those colors there are from that day's paper. So I kind of was stunned by how much color you could get out of a newspaper sometimes. And it's interesting what colors start to happen around certain holidays and things like that. certain corporations. You get a lot of dark green from Starbucks ads. You get a lot of red from Verizon ads, or at least you did. Who knows what it's like anymore? But anyway, and then here's another book project. So language comes in and out. Sometimes it's blatant, sometimes it's not. These I call broth drawings because it was between studios and I just wanted to make silly work, and I threw spoonfuls of soup on paper and then turned them into really weird characters. So you end up with a Janus chicken. Why not? I have a body of paintings and drawings called Paranography because I think it's a funny word. And so it's not awfully serious, but it's good work to come to every now and then to find a familiar form. I really love buying pears when they remind me of the Venus of Willendorf or anything else kind of art historical. And so here is more Paranography stuff. That's the goddess of heat waves on the left. More Paranography and chill. This is a set of drawings called Debris Portraits based on the Rosetta Stone mission, the Rosetta mission to the comet that was sent up by, I guess it was a NASA and European Space Agency collaboration, but I think it was the European Space Agency that had really spearheaded it. But it was just an amazing thing that they did. I mean, they basically threw something at a comet, like throwing a baseball at a football, or throwing a small object at a distant, also quite small object. But when they got images back of the comet, it's kind of one of those interesting things where scientific community is surprised to see the shape of something or whatever, surprised at the images, and that's always neat that you do something so experimental and so kind of crazy as a mission, and there's still a surprise in the end. So I liked the drawings, and I did a bunch of them, and then this was an installation at a place called Weathervane. And again, I mean, one of the reasons I got so into the mission is they called it Rosetta, and they really called it Rosetta because there was this idea of, discovering a kind of key, a language. And that was cool. I have a book project called The Produce Chronicles with flowers. That's kind of an ongoing thing. So all kinds of weird stuff turns up in my work. Sometimes the text is totally overt, and it's a lot of storytelling. The Produce Chronicles with flowers are really wordy, or sometimes they're brief and kind of strange. But other times there's a lot of writing involved, and there's like 100 pages of those. There are also like 100 pizzas in a pizza book I did, because that's a fun place to explore images and language. But, all of this stuff in one way or another is, this is one of my favorites, so I had to include it. What if you ordered a pizza and you got it and it had stigmata? Or in normal times when you could get a pizza delivered, what if someone had stigmata when they delivered you a pizza? It's just a thought. What if it were a mushroom and pepper pizza on top of it? Then I would feel validated. So I'm coming back to the chromatic alphabet paintings, because in many ways I can be silly in these, I can be serious in these, I can put all kinds of ideas into my work, but I never ever would have gotten to these, ever. I mean, you see that in my work, in a general sense, and maybe my character in a general sense, it is not quite so serious in a visual sense as the visual perhaps seriousness of what kind of some simple geometric abstractions with colors and shapes. But one day I wanted to make a painting that said the word quadro on it, which in Italian means square, but it's also a word to call a painting. Like we call a painting, or you call it a canvas or a piece, you know. So you can call a painting in Italian, you can call it a quadro, you can call it a pittura. But quadro also means square, and it also means painting. So I thought, oh, wouldn't it be funny to do a painting on a square canvas of the word quadro? And almost as soon as I had that thought, I hated it, because it was already boring, and it was already a one-liner to a very limited audience. I really wanted to paint that Q, like a, you know, just a beautiful Edwardian Q or something. But how stupid. So, or maybe not. Maybe somebody could make it work, but I didn't want to do it. So I didn't. But I liked the idea. And then I thought, well, what if I could do it and it didn't seem to say the word quadro. There weren't letters. And then I was stuck, because I had cracked open a little bit of ground and stuck my hands in, and there was a rabbit hole was going to open up, and I knew it. And I'm still in it, and I'm happy to be in it. But here's how it started with the alphabet. The only thing I knew when I knew I needed to create an alphabet was I knew how to do the vowels. If I was going to use just colors, I knew how to do the vowels. They were going to be open sounds in some way. Consonants would be closed. So I made some arbitrary decisions, but I didn't have to make too many. Once I made a few, the others kind of fell in place. So, you know, I wanted to use the primary colors. I wanted to use the primary colors in white to develop the body of work. And, you know, I don't even know what I think about these, but I do know that after I made them, or I didn't know what I thought about them. Now they're their thing. But this is the original set of vowels. And they're from left to right, A, E, I, O, U. One of the arbitrary decisions I had to make was, well, the alphabet has to start with a color. And if it starts with one color, then to go through to the primaries, then it has to end with, you know, if it's going to start with red, it has to end with blue. For whatever reason, I thought, you know, A seems more red than blue, and U seems more blue than red. So there you go. And it turns out that that's scientifically accurate. But anyway, so that's how yellow gets in the middle. But that's A, E, I, O, U. And there are only 5. You know, where's purple? Where's the other 6? Well, we don't really have a 6th vowel. We have that half vowel, right? Or something like that. Sometimes what? And so then I prepared the other small panels that would be the consonants. And they sat like that for like 2 years, because I just kept thinking, how am I going to make the consonants? Like, how am I going to make them have the same kind of meaning that I can relate to the openness of a vowel? And so even though I wasn't sure what I really thought about the vowels as such, I did know that I wouldn't really be able to make a decision on what the paintings looked like to me until the rest of them were filled in. And that was a long time later. Eventually it happened. Consonants are closed sounds, so they're closed off with gray. Gray being the mixture of all of the primary colors and white. And really all the paintings come from the primary colors and white. That's how they come into existence. This was the first set, the original chromatic alphabet. I never painted these letters like that again. They needed to become a simpler painting process so that I could make paintings and, you know, with words and write on paintings. And I think about them as sounds. So the forms that you see in the consonants, if vowels are open sounds, right? A opens the sequence of consonants that follow it until you get to E that opens the sequence of consonants that follow it. It's hard to see, but that is red and orange, yellow, green, blue, right? The image isn't great, but the shapes within the gray are determined a little bit by if it's a fricative or it's a sibilant, if it's a labial sound, that kind of thing. And so that's a long explanation that I won't go all the way into.
Hey,
But
Paul,
then
I want to jump in really quick just so you're aware of the timestamp here. So we got just 12 minutes until we have two questions.
yeah, I got it.
Keep going.
Okay. And then the placement of the shape refers a little bit to, well, sometimes not a little bit, but a lot to where a sound is produced in your mouth. So for example, you have B being a labial sound, a labial fricative, and so it gets produced on the lips, and so you say B, and that's why the circle is towards the front. It kind of places it. So those are original. I had to simplify it. This is the simplified chromatic alphabet. And then these are basically the letter forms that I would use to reproduce letters as sounds for other paintings. And this is what the surfaces of the paintings look like. So there's primary colors behind all of that layered gesso. So there's a bunch of layers of gesso, some primary colors embedded in there, and then more layers of gesso. That's where the texture comes from, okay? This is the painting that says Quadro. So after a long time, I finally made that painting, and I thought, well, oh, there it is. So there you go. And then this was the first time that I showed these paintings, and it was a lot of fun because people were familiar with my work in a way that is more reflective of the stuff that I showed you before. Now, some of that stuff is not from before, but people were familiar with my floor translations and things like that. And then they saw this and they said, Paul, where's your work? And people thought there was a two-person show because I had the work here and then the floor translations in the project room. And that was my favorite compliment. Who's the artist in the project room, or who's the artist in here? And I said, oh, I don't know. Who knows? But, you know, these are really important works to me. This is some different paintings featuring different words and some of the special characters. The special characters are letters with accents, vowels with accents and things like that, with diacritic marks and stuff. And, you know, there is a logic to how they're represented, but it's a long explanation. This is, well, whatever, it's about a 6 foot by 6 foot or so representation of the simplified chromatic alphabet. So these are all 12 by 12s of the alphabet. And so here you can see how A opens its sequence, E, I, O, U. So in a sense of teaching or learning, or translation even, or visual translation, these sounds or letters, without anybody needing to learn it too much, at this point, if I asked you, you know, would the letter Z be red or blue, you would already be able to say blue. You know, with certain kinds of alphabets, it's not really easy to describe the shape of the mark of a shape of a sound or something. Here's more special characters. More special characters. So that off to the left is a SH, and on the right is a CH, and they're conflated because a C with a hassock, which is like it's also called an inverted circumflex. That's the sound ch. And so CH, and it's the two kind of C and H together. This one says Kunstwerk, and it was a painting I kind of had to do, obligatory artwork. This one says look. And so the paintings then just started to assume that as titles, the word that is on the painting. And so I'll cycle through a bunch of them quickly and just tell you the title. tree, soul. This is a painting from a series of 8 that say the word soul in different languages from a solo show I had at Silas Farmores. Anima, it's the Italian word for soul. Alma, there are 2 paintings that say alma differently. One's, the conceit is that one is in Portuguese and one's in Spanish. This is the French word for soul. These are different. They're not, I call these incipient vowels. I don't know what I think about them, but I did them at one point, and I kind of dig them. But they're the vowels coming into existence in some weird mythical realm. Anyway, this one says anno, which is the Italian word for year. And it didn't take a year. It's a small painting. This is a small painting that says XL, which could be extra large. It could also be a Roman numeral. It could also be Xavier Lewis. It could be initial, but it's not. This is an initial painting. This is PD. And I knew at one point I wanted to do initials portraits because I thought if I did the initials for Dante Alighieri, they would be D, which is red, and A, which is red. And red is the color of exile. And Dante is, you know, maybe among the more famous exiles in history. And it was red, like that just happened. And so sometimes with these paintings, thinking about a word or something, it just happens, and it happens to seem right, or it happens to seem relevant in some way. This painting says Janus. And I was thinking about, you know, at the beginning of the year, Janus, the deity, and for January and whatever. And I thought it's interesting that the letters in Janus happen to be symmetrical, because not all the letters in the alphabet are symmetrical. So I thought I could make it and split it down the middle, and regardless of how this painting might look, I really love this painting because it was so hard. I don't tape things off in these paintings. I do the drawings and then I paint just very carefully with a knife, with a palette knife. And so I like that they take a long time. I like that it takes me forever to write a very simple word. It really takes a long time, and I love that. You know, like the small areas at the bottom of this one, this says Tor, so it kind of says door and gateway. And I made it after the Janus painting because Janus is also the god of gateways. So, you know, there's like a little bit of a physical challenge, like a double dare physical challenge or something in some of these paintings because they require a lot of patience. This one says luce, which is the Italian word for light. This says vaso. So this vaso, vase, vessel. I started to toy around with ideas of, you know, getting towards an image of something also. That could be a vase. It could also be, I don't know, weird stuff. This says sic, as in like, as it was written, sic arat scriptum. So SIC. This says hic und nunc, which is the Latin for here and now, and it converges in the sea. This says plein air. Funny. I want to purse this one like on an easel outside because that's hilarious to me and no one else. This says cream, and it's for the Wu-Tang Clan. And there's an emphasis on the A because it's cash rules everything around me, right? That's how the line goes. Otherwise, it's pretty monotone. Cash rules everything around me. So this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. It says merci. So it says the word for see in French, mer, and then it says C, S-E-A in English. And so it says C and C, and it says merci. So I call it Danke al mare, which means between German and Italian, thanks to the ocean. So that painting makes no sense for many reasons, but to me it does. This is the meaningless thing that I told you, that I mentioned earlier that I needed to mention. I had a funny conversation with somebody once about what if there were a color that were meaningless. And I thought, well, a funny name would be chartreuse. So this says chartreuse. Happens to have a lot of green in it. This is the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. The musical scale. The set of 7 paintings is called solfège. This painting says oops, and I made this when I started to shift into a different green because I got sick of that other green. Well, I didn't get sick of it. I needed to mix more, and it was very difficult to get that one. I thought, well, maybe I'll change greens and go to something brighter, and I got into this new green. So I thought of the painting Oops because it happened to be all green letters. What a good painting to open into a new sequence of paintings with a different green. This says Mofo because it says Mofo, and there was a Sheck West song that was really popular at the time that I happen to enjoy. This says jar on the left and on the right, and it's jar, jars, jar, a jar. And I like this because it says jar twice, but it also is the big jar kind of bullying the little jar into opening and being stuck ajar. So it's a sentence, jar, 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 jar. What if that were a headline? Ah, breaking news. This says sacro, so I broke one of my own rules and I used something different other than gray for the consonants, but sacro means sacred, so there's gold leaf on it. I'm back to the oops painting because oops opens a sequence of paintings. And the sequence is oops, shoot, uh-oh, SpaghettiOs, which I think every time somebody says uh-oh, because there was an old commercial when I was growing up, uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. And so here's where I thought they'd look like on a wall. Oops, drops into shoot, drops into uh-oh, and then shoots into SpaghettiOs. So there you go. The painting on the right says SpaghettiOs, and I kind of dig that one because it ends up being a backward S.
Well, I love these, and I don't want to be the one.
I know, I got a cruise, but here are some initial portraits, family initial portraits. All of these paintings say the word island in different languages. More islands. There's archipelago. And here's a triptych of paintings. These are all works on paper, obviously. Well, I won't go into them, but more works on paper. Centalto stuff. So in wrapping up, I want to just say that in expanding your practice outside of a familiarity with materials or concept or something like that, and kind of exploring that inkling of an idea you have, even if you're not sure of it, Centalto was kind of born out of the same thing, which is a gallery that I kind of opened on a whim without really intending to run a gallery in a loft that I lived in Brooklyn for a while. And it turned into almost 12 years of a lot of programming, discussions, exhibitions, meeting lots of artists, hundreds of artists working with there, and having thousands of pieces of artwork go through the space, which then turned into expanding Centalto outside of its own space, curating in other spaces. This is a show involving about 250 different people devoted to color and names. It's a show that I did in multiple spaces. And then there's some international stuff. This was the last thing that happened at Centalto. It's a show called Witnesses that nobody saw. And then there's some kindred practices like that in Brooklyn. Nortemar, TSA, Transmitter, they're either like collectives of artists that branched outside of their, what they were doing as artists. And I think it's a good time to think about these things. The Border is another one, El Sótano, exhibition spaces that are devoted to ideas of immigrant artists and working actively with immigrant artists. Here are some art spaces throughout the U.S. There's this kind of ethos everywhere in the U.S. The Yard is a very cool space in Colorado, or place that I'd love to see one day. They do exhibitions in their yard, and really cool stuff. Some of these places work with the local communities to even like Loca art, to get them legal representation and stuff. It's really incredible how much great stuff is out there. There are blogs out there. So, if you gravitate a little bit towards some kind of writing, think about starting a blog or contributing to some of these kind of newer upstart things. You're familiar with Hyperallergic. You're familiar with Two Coats of Paint. Those kinds of publications. Art F City. They started with a very similar ethos. Small scale, and now they're huge. Arcade Project, The Rib, and Art Spiel are some that are, starting to get really big now. The Rib is a great resource if you're looking for other kind of independent DIY art spaces in the US. Here are some projects that came up during the pandemic. Art at a time like this was a really great monument exhibition that Seth Rodney put on. And then there's this 50 Women project that is through an account called All the Lady Artists. Very cool. Finding women artists in different parts of the country and kind of focusing on them, getting outside of the epicenters. And here's back to tree with a tree behind it. And thanks for joining us. Wear your mask. It's kind of like wearing your person on your face in a real sense. So I'll close with that. And there's probably no time for questions, but I'll stay. If you got questions, I'm here.
Some questions in. I think I'm glad you shared some information about Chintaro and galleries that are happening, especially outside of New York and LA. And so,
a great time to do important stuff. You can do political messaging through a curatorial space. If I had Chintaro right now, I would have a platform, but I don't have the physical space anymore. But you have that too. So you have a access to these things.
All right. I'm going to get to some questions pretty quickly. Hopefully it's okay if we just go over by a couple minutes here.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, cool. The first question is, why was the background of, there's a painting Y, the letter Y, not completely painted in gray? So maybe explain the difference in coloration between the white.
Oh yeah. Y is it's sometimes Y, right? Sometimes it's a vowel. So that is a real outlier painting, or a real outlier sound letter in the cycle of letter sounds, because it has that dual nature. So it kind of looks like a vowel, but it also looks like a consonant. Yeah. There you go. Like I didn't have to really make that decision. You know what I mean? Like that's one of when I say that there are arbitrary decisions. The vowels are circles, but Y almost it defines itself as a shape in a way. If I'm adhering to the internal rules of this thing that nobody cares about its rules except me.
I knew there would be a definitive answer. I had a feeling.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other answer. But it's a great question. Thank you.
Let's see here, Jill, quickly. Are all your surfaces the same way, or is the preparation different depending on the word that you're going to depict?
No, I prepare the surfaces mostly in the same way. I really like painting on that surface. I like how the knife feels. I like the kind of weird effect that you get, a little bit of translucency. I like how the light and the white, the sort of, I think of the surfaces of the paintings as the source of the sound, since its primary color is in white. So far I haven't really changed the surface of the painting. Sometimes it's thicker than at other times. And, you know, sometimes that's a matter of what the temperature is like in a studio when you apply like 7 layers of gesso over the course of a couple of days. But the works on paper, I play with a bunch of different surfaces for those, and sometimes I don't prepare the surface for those. But they're a different thing. They actually help me break the rules. When I started doing works on paper, it was like, well, this is a totally different medium, so I'm not going to get similar colors. I don't need that surface, and I can do these other things.
Sherry, who's one of the low-res MFA students, wants to know, do you have a favorite or any favorite philosophers, thinkers from history that you refer to or have informed your practice? And she also wrote, this was great.
A lot. I have a very, despite the utter lack of bookshelf in my Zoom space, right? I mean, we all look at people's bookshelf. Like Kevin's got a lot of books, to look at. I do that too. Typically, I have a lot of books sitting around, but I don't. I'm kind of in a transitional space. But yeah, a lot. In particular, I don't know. A lot of philologists I get really into. Semioticians I get really into. Yeah, who knows why. I don't know. I would say like contemporary, like I like Giorgio Agamben a lot. I also like, I've been getting really into this Korean German philosopher lately named Byung-Chul Han, who's very compelling stuff. Very, 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 and he started as in metallurgy. So he started welding and making sculpture, and now he's like this really interesting philosopher. So there's a couple contemporary ones for you. Jean-Luc Nancy I like a lot. I like all kinds of stuff.
Awesome. I think, yeah, we gave some good examples there. Let me do, what causes the shift between abstraction and figuration in your work?
Really, it's often just comes down to a matter of language. The pizza book came out of, and this is a very interesting question to talk about, maybe the body of work that looked the most silly. But they're called Pizzas for Gorky. And they kind of came from a joke I had with a curator friend of mine who had done a show of drawings it was a group show, and I had some drawings in the show. And the show was built around a drawing that he had by Arshil Gorky. And so in that drawing, he was pointing out to me that the curator's name is Jason Andrew. And he was showing me the drawing and pointing to some of his favorite things. He's like, I really like that thing off to the right over there. It looks like a pizza. And then he told me that Gorky had done all these drawings in Virginia. And I was getting ready to go down and visit family in Virginia at the time. And I said, I'm going to do a bunch of pizza drawings and just, give them to you when I come back. And then it turned into a book project because I liked the idea of Pizzas for Gorky turning into thematic pizzas. And so it's like 100 pages of pizzas.
I like it. I think there's a lot of crossover too. It looks like we have one more question. So Adriana says, language in your work seems so materially vast and malleable. They wrote, I think about secret languages children make up and achieve almost a separate pod in which they can both communicate without comprehension, but also perhaps feel miniature masters of their universe. A taking back of power. How do these ideas and languages existing in conjunction with power dynamics appear in your work either throughout illegibility or otherwise?
Wait, can you read that last part again?
Of course I can. How do these ideas of language existing in conjunction with power dynamics appear in your work, either through illegibility or otherwise?
Oh man, these are really great points. I enjoy the idea that um, that kids would love these things, kids would love these paintings, or kids would love these drawings. Um, that's cool with me. You know, if children gravitate towards something, they're doing it in a pure way, and it's just visual and maybe visceral. But yeah, there is this sort of code, this sort of secret that hopefully conveys itself on some level. Looking at something long enough and to start to make sense of it. And with power dynamics, well, there's an interesting question of agency in the works. If you are familiar with my chromatic alphabet, I have some friends who kind of read it, or they basically read it. If you have a painting of mine from the chromatic alphabet series and it has a word on it, you're familiar at least with those letters. So there is a question of agency kind of every time I make one. For me, they really are. They look like these words in a real way on various levels. And my thought is that it doesn't take much to get familiar enough with the letter sounds in the alphabet. So there's definitely a question of agency, and sometimes with the word at play, there's a question of power dynamics or something like that, or power dynamics within art. That's the other thing about the cream painting is cash rules everything around me, right? But it's also a painting saying that cash rules everything around me, which is true for art in every way, except on a personal level, it's not, because nobody bought that painting. And the Method Man hasn't called me about it yet. But I think my phone will be blowing up after this.
Could be.
Jill, is it okay if I just, speaking of power dynamics, just jump in as program chair to offer a comment to Paul and a thank you, and just kind of highlight a couple of things. I'll try to be concise. And of course, when I talk with Paul, that sometimes is a challenge. But first, I just want to thank you for the presentation. I know you could have easily gone on for another hour and focused on the myriad of activities. I also just want to thank you for working with our students both today as well as the students you'll be working with tomorrow. And I guess, just in terms of kind of thinking about the work, I'm glad someone kind of talked about that shift from image to abstraction, because I think it, is probably coalescing somewhere in my superconsciousness at some point. But as I was kind of thinking about your work and listening to you talk about it, I was kind of going back to something that my students, all too often hear me talk about, the idea of painting in an expanded field, riffing off of Rosalind Krauss. But now I'm starting to kind of really thinking about how I approach your work as kind of an expanded field of language, or even an expanded field of translation, which I think then, makes all the interest in philology and semiotics make a lot of sense. And then certainly that kind of, if we think about Derrida and the play of the signifier, certainly that kind of way that you move from the silly to the serious. But getting to the serious and the things I just want to highlight that I think are really important for the students to see, but also I think important for me and my own understanding. I love how you talk about some of the one-liners and how that, with the chromatic alphabet, that one-liner was able to lead to a serious body of work. And I think, that's really important, that sometimes, yeah, those one-liners are there for the 3 people that are going to get it. And I think you and I have often had those things where we go, God, I think we're the only 2 people who will laugh at this. But at the same time, you have to kind of respect that and respect that impulse, because there might be something a little bit more there. And then I also really love kind of how you're talking about the labor of making these paintings, and indeed some of the ones that we're looking at right here. And about, you know, the way that they kind of slow you down. And I think that that's kind of an interesting phenomenon when we think about thought and language. You know, oftentimes I find myself, what I like about now composing on the computer is I can type fast enough that I'm almost as close as my train of thought, whereas writing used to be a kind of process of slowing down. And I could really still kind of notice the difference between when I handwrite something versus working on the computer and working digitally. So I really appreciate that kind of way that you really spend a lot of labor, and that this slows you down where you're really focusing in on the sound and some of those material things that you're looking to. And then just lastly, I think especially for some of our students who I think are very interdisciplinary in their approach, I think, you know, your career and the way that you have approached the multiple things you have done is just really exemplary in realizing that, yeah, there aren't these kind of clear boxes to check off. There aren't these kind of clear from point A to point B. I mean, I think sometimes we wish there were, but I think part of what keeps us excited as artists and as thinkers is just the way that there becomes these interconnections that don't happen necessarily at that moment, but only kind of start to click 2 or 3 years later. So I think it really speaks to the importance of patience. And I also just appreciate all the humor you brought. I don't think I've laughed this much in quite a while. So thank you.
Well, I'm just at home laughing all day.
Well, that I needed a good laugh, and I feel much better now after this. So, in the best way, in the best complimented way, of course.
I had to keep it. I had to keep it active. Otherwise, my refrigerator makes these funny noises, and I thought if it starts making those noises during the talk, it's going to be very strange. It sounds like a monster.
Maybe you can paint out the refrigerator noises next or something.
It really sounds like a monster. And there's no ice maker. It's the simplest free. It does nothing, this refrigerator, except sit there and churn out heat. And it makes these noises. And my landlord loves it. I said it makes all these noises. He said, yeah, it's gonna make them noises there, but it's brand new. We got the same one. And I said, but it's okay that it makes all the noise. And he said, yeah, you gotta look in the manual. It says it in there. And he was not lying. I looked in the manual, and the refrigerator is true. The refrigerator is quite new. And I looked in the owner's manual, which he gave to me, and it actually says your refrigerator may sometimes create strange noises. And it kind of leaves it off at that. I thought that's like the best thing I've ever found in an owner's manual or in a you know, how to use manual is your refrigerator is going to be kind of weird and a monster, big, huge, heavy monster hanging out in your kitchen with you.
Yeah, one could only
on your Zoom calls one day.
Yeah, one could only aspire to write that kind of line for an owner's manual. I think, I forget if I ever talked to you about this, but there was a moment where I was going to write instruction manuals kind of right after graduate school, and I was desperate for employment. And I was just trying to think, what kind of weird things could I do with that? And that sounds like it wasn't a weird thing, but it would be something that I would like to just insert, but it sounds like it's an explanation.
It's one of the reasons why I've never thought I should translate medicinal descriptions. And I thought there's too much opportunity for metaphor there, and then somebody's life would be imperiled. So don't mess with it. Pharmaceuticals do enough damage already. I don't need to contribute with language.
I feel that. All right, we got to wrap stuff up. I hate to be the one to kill this conversation, but it was awesome to have you, and thank you for everyone for coming on a Thursday night. We have another artist coming next Monday at 5 o'clock, so be sure to tune to that. And you can follow Paul on Instagram if you want to keep up with his work. I'm sure most of us are here, but if you haven't, that's pretty active on it, I'm thinking so.
Yeah, sometimes.
When you feel like it.
But I also like looking at other people's work all the time. So, you know, I will look at your work. If you connect with me on there or something, I do. And I enjoy it. And I enjoy giving feedback. So I've really enjoyed being, you know, a visiting artist and doing the crits and everything. Again, you know, it's enjoyable in the physical spaces. It's enjoyable this way too. It's all kinds of opportunities to do it this way that don't really exist in the physical space. So advantages also.
Exactly. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and end this here.
Okay. Thanks everybody for coming.
Paul, you have a lot of thank yous in the chat if you're able to pull the notification.
Thanks back at you.
All right, everyone.
Thanks.
See ya.
Bye.